if I can say I'm doing what I'm good at and I'm doing what it's needed, but I do love what I'm doing, and maybe you'll be wondering later, like, why? there's there's a lot of different stuff I do, so I just warn you about that. So today it's kind of a little bit about that, like giving you snippets of some of the work I've been doing under this theme of governing urban resilience. But I don't know to what extent you've been exposed to some of these things or concepts or ideas. So feel free to, at any point, ask questions, interrupt me, or and ask to clarify something, because I wasn't sure in terms of the audience where you would be at with some of these concepts. So, and I know that some of these things that I've been working on are kind of like maybe not necessarily mainstream urban planning related things, but I'm sure in your with your resilience community there that you won't think I'm that outside of it. But let me I'll try just presenting the slides. Let me know
are you worried about if anything goes, you can always forward it to me too, and I can if we have any problems, but it should go okay.
Do you see them now?
No.
No, okay, hang on. Maybe let me
Yep.
All right, and then let me know if you're seeing the actual slides or the slides with notes.
Nope, just the actual, I'm seeing the actual slides.
Okay, because I have to,
and I'll,
it always get confusing.
I know, yeah, I have the same problem. I'll watch the chat too in case anyone has questions.
Yeah, that's great. Yeah, you can always put in chat, and then Michelle, you can let me know. But so yeah, so then I'm gonna give you some, like I said, some pull from different cases, let's say. But overall, this is work that I've been doing recently under the Urban Resilience to Extreme Sustainability Research Network, which is a large network of research institutions, practitioners across 10 different cities that the National Science Foundation started 5 years ago. And so we're actually kind of in the 6 years of it. It's sort of wrapping up, but then but we're continuing through other projects and funding that we're doing. But under that project, which I'll describe here in a second more, there's two elements of it that we've been working on that relate to urban resilience governance. And one is the production or the exploration of futures, resilient future, very long-term future with our different collaborators across these cities. And then as part of that, understanding both existing governance systems, and then how our cities organizing themselves to do resilience, and then relating that back to the futures. And so I'm going to do that. I'm going to show you kind of what I mean in governance by looking at framings and how our cities framing the problems around climate resilience and the concept of resilience itself. And then I'm going to focus on a case in San Juan, Puerto Rico, because A, I know it better, and B, it's the first city we did scenario work on, and therefore we started analyzing some of the data on, so it's also convenient to present on it. And then this just gives you maybe a sense of I'm not going deep into any of the work, but just kind of give you a sense of what we mean by when we say governing urban resilience. And so first, a little bit about the project. Again, this is a network that formed. It's a research network, but the idea was that it's interdisciplinary or transdisciplinary because it involves co-producing knowledge and strategies with different practitioners in our cities. And so the network involves, it started with 9 cities. Now, with more funding from the NSF, the SETS Convergence Project, we added Atlanta, and Mexico City, I think, might be there too. I just realized it's not on the map, but anyway, it's been expanding. And so it's a US Latin American network. And all of these cities, we've been mainly focusing on climate extreme events. So, heat waves, drought, and flooding, both coastal and urban flooding. And as you can see there, we've had, I think that the number of institutions have gone higher and the number of participants. It was very much an education network too. We had a lot of students and graduate fellows as part of this, and a large amount of funding that actually also went out really quickly. But it just gives you a sense, and I'm presenting this too, so it gives you a sense of these new types of large network science organizations that not the agencies like the National Foundation is seen as important for promoting climate resilience, from learning across cities, and really trying to do transformative ideas. And in the case of the UREX, this network, one of the main frameworks that we're developing and sort of really trying to move the science on is this idea of cities as social, ecological, technological systems. So the concept of resilience have been well developed in the theory of social ecological systems. So looking at the relationships between people and ecological systems and what that means in terms of how the feedbacks of those systems and how they relate to each other. There are multiple levels, multiple scales. But there was a little focus on the technological piece and the infrastructure. And, with cities, that doesn't really make sense, because it is the infrastructure, the built stuff, the hard stuff that really mediates how we can either enjoy the ecosystem services that our natural systems bring, benefit from them, as well as how these are designed in highly designed landscapes like urban systems. So also the idea being that we think that in order to build more resilient cities, the solutions need to be at a social, in that integration of social, ecological, and technological. Doing one may miss, you may have blind spots on other ones, and therefore may create failures or erode resilience in another. And then the network does a lot of different type of resilience research and science studies and other kinds of projects. But one of the main focus has been the developing of scenarios, so future scenarios, with the idea being that with such acceleration of so many different global aspects, urbanization, our economic systems, globalization, but climate change as well. What we're seeing is that future changes are very dynamic, they're very complex. I don't think, I think you will believe me with that, with the pandemic, right? There's really not a lot of normality these days. And so anticipating that, and in the future, then what that means is that we can no longer predict those futures. Therefore, we can no longer keep building and making cities the way that we have been, and that a lot of the ways that we've been designing them and infrastructure, it's obsolete to the type of futures and extreme events that we are expected. So we need to bring together different perspectives, different knowledge systems, different walks of life of people that experience the city, and together think about different ways of building the cities of the future. And so scenario building is a technique that you can look at. Weather projections is one type of scenarios, but these are very open scenarios. These are very the idea is to look at to develop, given current trends, what are some very desired ways that we could go, and that just kind of helps us think and evaluate what are the strategies that then we need to do now and start implementing now in order to get towards those futures. So we, in all of the cities, we develop these participatory scenarios, some of them being more adaptive, so addressing challenges like extreme flooding, Strategic scenarios have more to do with what cities are doing now and what are the strategies that they are proposing now, and just sort of seeing what that means in terms of where they could go in the future. And then transformative means thinking very outside of the box, like thinking very something very different from the status quo, and what would that look like in a city. And so trying to open up the space, the problem space, for planners, for civic leaders, for scientists to really try to think more broadly. And so we did these across all of our cities. Oh, sorry, I didn't realize those were there. So again, that's the same thing I just said. We did these workshops across all of our cities. It was a huge amount of work, but we learned a lot, and there was a lot of different a ton of different strategies and approaches, and we're talking about US cities and Latin American cities. And so you can imagine that, I mean, the diversity of possible, you know, the possible futures were a lot so robust because we have so many different perspectives, right? We didn't have just one discipline or one set of experts or engineers only thinking about resilient futures. And just to let you know that this actually just came out, but it is a book that is geared towards practitioners and graduate students. So trying to be more methods and practical based on how we did these futures. So and I think it's open access. So if you Google it, you can find it and you learn more about our workshops. But I'm just giving you this background because then I'll come back to it when I'm talking more about the actual analysis of existing governance systems. And so another one of the key aspects we had in the UREX then was also understanding resilience, governing how we govern resilience. And so we had this task force, a governance analysis task force. And I just wanted to kind of acknowledge that a lot of the work I'm presenting today is a result of a collaboration of a lot of different researchers and students and postdocs. So, and that is the link to a webpage that describes this task force. But the overarching questions that are guiding the work we do is basically first understanding how cities are governing urban resilience, because this is, again, a new, you would say, an emerging development in many of our cities, in how they plan and how they govern. And when I mean governance, I should say too that I'm not just talking about government and the government agencies or the institutions that are responsible for city design and management, but I'm talking about broadly the various actors, organizations, from NGOs, other civic groups, universities, business sector, all kinds of different actors that in different ways, they're helping steer cities through their agenda making, through their strategies, through their advocacy even, right? So those are all ways that cities are governed, what they do on an everyday basis. And then but the main question too was because we wanted to know, well, if we're developing all these future scenarios and we're trying to look at different strategies and ways that we can do things differently, to what extent are existing systems, conducive, capable? Do they have the capacities, the institutional structures and networks that are more conducive for that? And that is partly informed by the literature and theory about what are some modes of governance that are more conducive to resilience and adaptability, like adaptive governance, resilience governance, and a lot of different transitions theory and so on. And all of those frameworks we operationalize them with these key questions about what we're looking for in our city. So basically just a basic mapping and inventory, or what are the actors, because many times we just don't know how these cities are organizing. Some cities have chief resilience officers, some cities don't have any, and that work is being done by civic organizations, for instance, or some cities instead of a resilience office, they have it under another department. So it's kind of very different, and we're trying to map that out. And then what are the various strategies and approaches they are prioritizing and proposing? How are they framing resilience? And this I'll get into more with respect to how framing resilience matters has implications on the types of strategies that are promoted. But then also how organizations collaborating, how are they networking, their capacities, and to what extent the knowledge that they use is actually going to help them move towards those futures and help them be adaptive and anticipatory. And we're also interested, from an academic perspective, the differences between US and Latin American cities, partly also because there's very little knowledge base also in Latin American cities. A lot of our urban ecology, urban resilience, sustainability work comes from European and US based cities, so very northern based, and tropical cities like San Juan are not very well represented in that knowledge base. So that's also a part of the interest. So first, starting about resilience framings, we were asking, okay, so we're scientists, we know that there is a lot of different ways of defining resilience, and it's still very contested concept in the literature, especially it kind of originating in a more engineering type of talking about resilience as resisting or coming to status quo, hardening, that kind of way of defining resilience, to social ecological systems theory, where the relationship and the idea that systems can have multiple stable states, and so resilience is the ability or capacity to be able to adapt and be in different systems, and so building resilience is about allowing that adaptive capacity. But then there's still critiques from social scientists about whether that is really transformative enough. How can we, that resilience may have implications for thinking that to be resilient is maintaining the status quo, that it's a conservative notion. And so this is back and forth in the literature. And that's okay. I mean, I myself think different perspectives and definition is a productive tension, as long as it's discussed and deliberated, right? But we also wanted to know how practitioners and the people on the ground doing resilience are framing resilience. Are they also having these tensions? And then, or are they actually thinking of resilience in the way that, from a social ecological systems perspective, is the ability also to transform, to maintain identity and function in the face of change, but also the opportunity to transform and be in a completely different state. And so then we looked at how to give you first a sense of why this is important. Let's take two different resilience plans in one city, New York City, not that far out from each other in terms of times that they were developed. And in one plan, the Bloomberg plan, when you look at the way that resilience is defined, and oops, sorry, I'm having some little issues here. Okay. Resilience is more focused on that idea of sort of bouncing back. And when there is an event, how can we quickly return back to normality? And a lot of the strategies proposed are based on some sort of like specific, what we call specific adaptive capacity, that are like short-term, quick to recover, but also development in flood-prone areas, increase attack space, and some other ways of generating specific adaptation. On the contrary, the next plan was a little bit more focused on general adaptive capacity, so defining resilience as a more systems a property, and that it needs to also emphasize income inequality, affordable housing, education, and other social demographic parameters that in the literature suggest that increases resilience to a variety of shocks and threats, and not just one shock and not just short-term response, but really let's focus on a more systems approach. And so those two have a different idea of what resilience is, and that translates into what kind of policies are being pushed in planning and policy. So we looked in the literature at what are some of the key tensions and discussions around resilience, and so we developed this code book. And we looked at, for instance, definitions of resilience based on whether there's tensions whether resilience is a property of the system, like with no, regardless of whether it's good or bad, it's just described as a property of the system. And then there's other definitions that have to do with whether it's good or bad. What is the outcome of resilience? So resilience for to make sure livable communities can thrive in coastal areas, something like that. So very much a social goal. And then process has to do with how it's done, how, if it's done through a participatory approach, if it's done by or more of a top-down process type of thing. Some definitions in the literature talk about resilience more in terms of shocks, just only really refer to it like for a big storm event, for instance. And some others say that no, we should be focusing resilience both in terms of shocks or stresses like climate change, like sea level rise, for instance, more slower types of presses. And then I think one of the biggest tension is the one I just described, which I visualize here more as a spectrum of how much change is required or is intended. So change meaning no change in terms of the status quo. So that would be more of the engineering description of resilience. And then all the way to bouncing back is how some people define it. Coping is kind of more like adapting. Bouncing forward is another way people have been defining it. But bouncing forward is kind of bouncing, better than before, but it's not necessarily different. It doesn't necessarily say that, when we're in a situation where we just keep getting kind of hammered and kind of in disasters, it means that things may not be working well. So we really need to change things. We really need to transform and change the status quo. So that's another element. And then some other elements of what we think are part of a definition of resilience that is more transformative is whether it addresses equity, whether it's anticipatory in the sense that it's very forward-looking. Resilience is a forward-looking concept, but we're thinking more in terms of very long term, like very not just in forward looking immediate but in the sense of exploring futures, let's say, and sustainability, which also sometimes gets used in exchange with resilience. And then whether going back to our SETS framework, what aspects are being emphasized more, is it's social, ecological, or technological dimension. And I'm gonna move really quickly through the methods because I know if I don't move forward, then I don't want to run out of time later. But this is just to show you that we did the survey across all the cities as part of the general overall UREX approach. And then from this survey, we had a lot of multiple questions that relate to the initial questions I showed you earlier. But in terms of the framings of resilience, we were looking at this one open-ended question. And so we had a lot of different texts that came out from all these responses, 547. And then we use that code with those elements of definitions that I showed you before and analyze those. So I'm going to summarize what our findings were overall across all the cities. And then I'm going to show you 2 other figures that will show some of the differences across the cities for some of the more for the transformative definition piece that we were most interesting. But in terms of whether resilience is defined as systems or property, process or outcome, we found that across the board, most cities and we also look at these across different governance sectors. So government agencies, civic organizations, business and academic groups. And overall, there were differences across some of the sectors, but more responses align with resilience viewed as in a more conservative, so systems, property type of response than outcome or process. So another way of saying it is that that is viewed more as an objective or non-normative concept rather than a normative concept. And so that is more associated with a more traditional way of looking at resilience, although there's still debate about whether that's the case. But there wasn't a lot of difference in terms of whether there's definition of both the shocks and stresses. Most cities do include both. But the thing that was interesting to us is that along with the systems property perspective of resilience was that there was very little elements of transformation, like equity, anticipation, sustainability in their definitions. So that again tells us that they're seeing it more as a maybe more towards the engineering perspective. And then most cities associated resilience, actually, this was surprising, more with the social dimension, and then the technological and the ecological. I was thinking it would be more technological. That might have to do more with the sample that we had, but across the board, no, there wasn't most respondents it would only consider 1 or 2 dimensions, but never all 3 really. But then when we viewed how much change, like this real tension there's of what resilience means, is it really going back to normal or going to different, ability to transform to different systems? That's where we see quite a few differences across the cities. There are some cities that are more like if you look at Portland or even where New York City, they were more strongly on the spectrum of towards bouncing forward and transformation. And then you look cities like Baltimore, which surprised me actually, because I know that equity is a big component in Baltimore. But then some of the Latin American cities too were also more in the spectrum of bouncing back. And these are the kind of things that actually end up generating more questions that then we need to dig deeper and through more qualitative approaches. And I intend to do that. But for now, some of the speculations are, to me, that cities like Portland and New York City that have very well developed resilience plans have gone through a public process of debating these topics, and therefore maybe have gotten more input from other perspectives that have taken them to more progressive view of resilience, versus cities like the Latin American cities. The resilience concept is kind of emerging, and it is a northern concept. So maybe they're seeing it pretty much as a textbook definition rather than what we really understand as resilience now, as a more transformative. So those are the kind of things that now we need to really dig into to explain some of these variations. But still, I think the message is that the framing of bouncing back to normal, it is more dominant than transformative. And this is also why we say this, because when we look at more explicitly at elements of that we associate with more transformative resilience, like equity and sustainability. So equity is comes up very little in most of the cities except Portland, again, and New York City. Baltimore is now there. And again, I think it's because these cities have very explicitly tackled things like racial issues and economic inequalities. But then sustainability is also not quite represented there, which, there's debate about whether sustainability and resilience should be integrated as concepts. So, but this is clearly telling that people see it as different. So just to summarize, this part of the presentation is that if we see the way that from the perspective of UX and thinking about resilience as an opportunity to rethink cities and really take and transform them so that people can still face changes, climate change, but thrive, still be able to thrive in those cities. That means that we cannot keep producing the same cities that are, making us vulnerable, right? So there's an element of transformation, but that we're not seeing those elements in the way that at least practitioners are framing resilience. So that can be problematic in terms of using resilience in practice. But some people say, well, maybe resilience is more like a boundary object, and that it helps people come together from different perspectives. And I agree with that it doesn't have to be, have a unified definitions consensus. I think plurality, again, conceptual plurality is key, but clarity is also key, and negotiation and open deliberation is also key. So I think that the key message here is that as you're using resilience in practice, you got to make sure that that it's deliberated and not just taken for granted what it means. And then we did see cultural and political differences, especially in the US and Latin American cities. And so this is something that we want to also explore more, why that is, where that comes from. I just want to check on time and how I'm doing, because
20 minutes.
Okay. All right, well, make sure you stop me if you see I'm going too long and you want.
Okay.
Because I do want to make sure we have time for question or discussion, but I can I'll go on. Now I'm going to talk more about sort of the strategies and the networks in our cities. I'm going to give the example of San Juan, and I have to warn you that some of these slides I put together from another presentation I was getting, and then I realized, oh, there's some Spanish in those. So if you see those, I'll just ping me so that I can make sure I'm translating. So for San Juan, again, going back to the exercise of developing resilient futures with the UX project. San Juan was one of the first ones that we did the workshops, the participatory workshops. And so that was in 2017. We've had some time to really modify, revise, and also start to really take a look at the governance system and kind of put those together. But we also had Hurricane Maria right in the middle in 2017. So that really became a focus of ours in terms of also seeing how the governance system responded. And it was like an actual experiment there. Today, I'm not gonna go into that, unfortunately, because we're still working out. There's some things that we're still working out and trying to better understand or assess, and we're in the middle of analyzing the data, so I didn't feel so comfortable. But I'm gonna give you some preliminary analysis of the survey, so you start seeing at least the beginning of the story, let's say, in terms of some of the things that we're seeing from the governance landscape, and then I can feed in with some of the Hurricane Maria. But right before Hurricane Maria, we did these workshops, and we did they were, again, participatory workshops. We have we invited people from different agencies, planners, residents, civic groups, academics, a lot of different people that we knew were kind of active or aware in urban planning, to some extent climate change, but really focus on the city and development. And then we asked them, through a series of exercise, let's develop these different adaptive and transformative scenarios. And so here it is where they're in Spanish. So let me tell you. So in terms of the adaptive and resilience scenarios, the main focus, even though we were looking at heat, also in drought, the main focus there was flooding, sorry. And they wanted to see flooding. They wanted to be able strategies for coastal flooding, river flooding, urban flooding. I mean, we're a city of water everywhere, and they all cause their own challenges, but at the same time, in the end, they kind of integrate together, because the idea was that the strategies needed to address them integratedly. But then we thought about, okay, so what are very different type? I mean, imagine that we're not that vulnerable to flooding, because we've created these very new and different cities that are no longer making us vulnerable to very extreme events. So to do that, we looked at visions of food and energy security, given our island condition, and that a lot of our resources and our energy comes from outside. That makes us very vulnerable. So we need to transform that aspect, a more connected municipality, both in terms of from all the assets, let's say, from a more social perspective, but also the ecological systems in the city, to make them more connected to the transportation, and then adjust a more livable city. So really focusing on building equitable justice as a starting point for a more resilient and city. And so those are all we have. These all developed. We developed different models of how the city, land cover models of how the city will look like, strategies associated with these visions. We did also, we developed the strategies were very specific to places and maps and participatory mapping there. We even used narratives as a way for people to express what the city will look like in 2080. And did I say it was 2080? Like really, really long term, like trying to get people really to get away from the things that keep them from doing change. Like, no, we can't do this because we have these codes and regulation. It's like, no, that won't matter in 2080. So really think outside the box. What can we change? And then coming back to present and doing a timeline of what needs to be done, right? So we did that. We have that all for all the scenarios, and we have kind of like a compilation of those in this story map that I have here, and I can send you the link or put it in the chat later. So you can see for each of the scenarios, we have a tab. They are in Spanish, sorry, but we are going to develop for the other cities. We're going to develop them in English too. But you can at least see, they're very visual, the story maps, so you can at least get a sense. There's vignettes there. There's videos. We even, I think one of the groups actually developed a song. I don't know if we included it, but again, it's like you seeing other kinds of ways of knowing, in addition to modeling, to mapping and all that stuff. So I invite you to check them out. But the one we're focusing on now is the ones related to particularly river and urban flooding, because the coastal flooding one was very interesting, was the most transformative because it was a vision or a scenario of managed retreat. Unfortunately, I don't have those data for the survey in relation to that analyzed yet. And this is what I'm focusing right now, also because our practitioner partners are focused on this right now, because there's currently an Army Corps of Engineer project that geared to channeling the river. And so it's putting attention, a lot of attention and concern for this particular strategy that could actually be a barrier to ever achieving this vision of integrated water management, because it's basically putting complete hard infrastructure through the middle of the city. And I don't know if you can see my cursor, but it would be all through here, a concrete channel. And I should have actually brought some visuals on that, but this isn't a presentation about that, but just to say that that's the concern right now. And it has given us a window of opportunity to bring back this vision and the strategies that our partners, we worked on in 2017 through 2019, and offer a counter proposal. So we're working on that right now. But some of the strategies that were developed there were, actually uncovering the river, using the river as an amenity of the city and living more with the river, and also focusing attention on the flooding because of an infrastructure problem in terms of the upgrade, the bad stormwater system, sorry. But, very never maintained, very degraded. And yet the focus that right now are putting to a solution is to actually take away the river. And so it's a very different idea of the city that is here proposed. And this one includes more nature-based solutions to manage flood risk, actually reduce the gray infrastructure. So not doing those kinds of proposals, elevate homes and create rain gardens, use the river again as a recreational and community building alternative. But also in order to improve the overall urban flood infrastructure, start at small scales with green infrastructure across the households, and with the more you do so, then they build up the scale. But then also social resilience strategies. So help people better be more protected and have capacities for when there is an extreme events, to have shelters and be connected, these sort of resilience hubs across the communities, connect them with smart technologies and let them know, this is happening here, learn from them, but also, hey, it's really raining up in the watershed, you might expect a lot of flooding, because we do have a very steep topography, and better connect communities in that sense to help each other out. And then governance strategies, create a more watershed level multi-sectoral governance, because right now the little planning there is for flooding is only looking at stormwater and infrastructure, does not consider river flooding. It's not integrated to coastal flooding. And then the agencies don't interact at all. And so that's part of the fragmentation that people see as causing the flooding. And then some other, again, promoting more bicycling and transforming abandoned lots into ring. So there's a lot of diverse different strategies. And some of these were like, more like we can do these in the next 20 years, where some of them, they're seen more like, okay, maybe in 30 years and so on. But what we're trying to do now is take all that and then come back and be like, okay, so to what extent is a current governance system? And when I say current, really is pre-Maria, conducive then to allowing these transitions to happen? Like, can integrated water management vision be possible given the planning framework and the networks that are in San Juan right now? So we use the data from the survey, and so this just it says that 44% were from government agencies, 31% from civic, research 22, and then some hybrid like public-private partnership, basically utilities, were a few of those from the survey. So, and consistent with what we saw in the scenario work, and is that urban flooding from precipitation, basically, let's say, whether it's river or urban, is the most concern, climate extreme event of most concern. Again, this changed slightly after Maria, but not as much. So flooding is still some of the main concerns. And then we also asked about their preferred strategies to select what are the strategies that they see more relevant for addressing flooding. And so I know in the left, there's a lot of things to read, and they're in Spanish again. So I'm summarizing the top preferred strategies. Again, this is from the survey. And the key thing about the survey is that it covered a broader range of actors and not just the ones that came to the workshop. So again, we were trying to cast a wide net of different actors involved or interested in climate resilience to climate change. And so there is consistency, and you would say level of support for nature-based solutions across the different governance sectors, as well as planning and urban design, with maintenance of stormwater infrastructure. So here you see that aspect coming out as well. Reduction of gray infrastructure, or putting on permeable surfaces, and riparian vegetation. So these are also consistent with what we're seeing in the scenarios. And then the least preferred strategies, or that didn't even come up, were river channelization, early warning systems, and elevating buildings. So those are things that, probably in this context are not gaining acceptability. And we're seeing it now with the river channelization. And then to then really say, okay, are these strategies, again, just reflective of the governance survey? Do we see a level of acceptance across even more of the agendas in the governance system? We also analyzed the different plans and documents, let's say official documents from major state, city, civic organizations, and also look at similar strategies and to what extent these strategies were part of their plans for addressing flooding. And again, I know you can't really read those, but so I summarized here. And again, nature-based solutions for flood mitigation became some of the top, riparian vegetation in flood zones. And then the education capacity building, science technology, planning and urban design, those are very high level, kind of like, again, general adaptive capacities that to me are typical of government planning approaches to like always have, the versus very specific stuff. So, but still, I think quite important for transformative resilience too. And then least preferred strategies, relocation is a very contested, highly tensioned topic in San Juan. So it doesn't surprise me. Channelization of rivers and streams, and again, elevating buildings. So those are, strategies that, again, both from the planning framework, all these different plans from across different sectors, and the survey and the scenario. I just realized that right now I need to create a slide that has all these different sort of entry points into seeing what's the temperature of the different governance actors in terms of what preference there are. But there's clearly an interest in nature-based solutions to address flooding, and some of the directions that are being taken now, which also has to do with funding from Maria for recovery, are pushing us in a different direction. So that's something I'm concerned about. And then just shifting quickly to the actual organizational capacities and networking capacities in the governance system right now, and to what extent is also reflective of what our institutional structures that are needed. This is a network map. Michelle is really familiar with these, of the different, again, organizations that people in the survey said that they saw them as that they collaborated with, or that they interacted with in different ways, whether it's projects, advocacy, or education, etc., around climate resilience. And so what we find, so these are kind of like considered by others in the city to be the main actors. And so a couple of observations, and one is that it is a very small network. I mean, if you look at some of the networks that Michelle has worked with, for instance, and then I've done this before in San Juan. I did this in 2009 on the topic of more like urban environment and stewardship, and but it was still the same actors. So there's not been a lot of change. But both times that I've done this, it is a diverse network though. There's a lot of different governance actors represented from the various government levels that we expect: local, municipal, federal, the state blue, local yellow, federal green. But there's quite a few nonprofit groups, the ones in red, and academic research institutions in sort of that pink. The business sector is not very well represented, and that is not surprising at all. But a small network, 41 organizations. I mean, if you compare that to another network we did for Atlanta recently, they had 200 different organizations doing this type of climate resilience work. So, but one of the things that, in terms of the more central networks, and these are kind of like, you could see, are the more popular actors among the people that responded, that they saw as very influential and important for doing climate resilience work. The Department of Natural Resources came, the Department of Natural Resources is in blue. So we actually have them separated by offices, and that's because there are a lot of quite differences within the organization, but taken together, they do have a high level of influence and primary role. But then after that, it's all civic or hybrid groups, like the San Juan Bay Estuary Program. It's a regional organization, an environmental organization. Enlace, it's a hybrid, a kind of hybrid nonprofit that does a lot of work with justice and communities in the city. And San Juan Ultra, which is a network of research on social ecological resilience and urban sustainability that I started in 2019, and now it's being perceived as a key actor in the network. So that's a change, I guess. We weren't there when I did this before. But what you notice too, though, is that in those central actors, the municipality is not there. Some other key state planning departments that are very relevant for flood resilience, like the Department of Water, the water agency, Acueductos y Alcantarillados. That's the one that does the stormwater drainage system. The Department of Transportation, the municipality, they are not seen as highly that relevant in the collaboration work, in the resilience work, or in the case of the municipalities, because historically they have less of a role than, say, in the cities in the US. We have a much more state centralized system, and that's reflected both in terms of capacities but their role in these types of issues. So they're more administrative, let's say. So that's a big difference from cities in the US, where climate change is being done at the level of cities.
Tischa, we're at time.
Great.
But we still have my class goes until for a while longer. So if anyone's here,
okay. Well, class, I'm on the wrap up, and then there's more time for questions and discussion. Then, or if you guys want me to go back to something and explain more, great. But so I have to admit that I'm still also putting all of these things together. So you're actually, any feedback and questions that you have will be good for me in terms of the storyline, because as you can see, this research is very much multi-method, multi-scale, and it's about, you're studying governance systems and, cities, and this is complex stuff, right? So how do you do it in a way that things are fitting together and giving us an entry point to know, can we really make these transitions? What needs to change? Can we be more targeted about the change? And so, one thing is that we need to work more on how we work with our practitioners and what resilience is, right? If we're doing collaborative work and talking about climate resilience, climate change, then, we might need to revisit some of these terms and what they mean and what it means to them, and to make sure that what the thinking that is driving things on the ground is really, what we think is going to get us in that direction. And if not, why not? Maybe we're focusing on the wrong things, right? Like many people have made us aware that equity should be the starting point for a lot of climate change things, but then again, we're seeing that that's not how practitioners may be seeing it. So again, how can we help? And it doesn't have to be that we, have them use our definition, because scientists, that doesn't mean we have the all truth of what things should be. If anything, we're learning from this type of work, right? But we work with them, and we work with helping them think through, like with the scenario exercise, with working together in a project, and me learning about how they disagree on something and how they're interpreting, and then we come together to see it better. So all these things are about a kind of co-producing these capacities together. And then I think the governance piece often gets not ignored, but not necessarily part of the toolkit of resilience work necessarily. We're very focused on action and the solution space, and that's where you want to go. But I feel like if understanding, it's kind of like my husband. He's an engineer. He does energy audits for homeowners to take them to change to all energy efficient, and put EPA Energy Star stuff, and they want all these solar panels. And he said, it's gonna be very costly for you if you set up a system that doesn't fit with your house and what you really need. And so that's why he does this assessment and audits and analyzes the entire house to make recommendations that makes more sense for the house as a system. And some of those are in behavior, in the actual homeowner behavior, and some of them are actually having to do very structural changes and things like that. So again, I think of cities in that way too, is that, we want to move forward with the solutions. But I think that, again, this is where, am I doing what it's needed? I don't know, but I do think that, the jury's still out. But we might be more better at creating the type of partnerships and relationships that I think we need in this kind of work, by understanding where we are better in that respect. So I think that's what I have there. Yes. So I'll take any questions or feedback or anything.
Thank you so much. It was so great to learn more about what you're working on. Do folks have questions for Tischa?
Michelle, I apologize for jumping off, but we have the environmental science student presentations that I need to head to. So thank you so much for your presentation. What a delight to see you. And I apologize for jumping off so quickly.
No worries. Sorry, I took longer.
Okay.
Hi, Eric. So as we've been thinking about these, we've done this semester the whole overview of urban ecology, from the physical environment to the biotic environment, and we're moved into equity and environmental justice, and now we're talking about governance. So they have seen some network diagrams and have seen some STUMAP, but this is a different layer of thinking about futures and just urban resilience. And it's not just one definition. I think that is this exploration of the term is so important, because I think it's become like, what sustainability was 10 years ago or whatever, where it's just like, okay, we're going to be resilient, but what does it actually mean?
Right.
So does anyone have questions or comments or further explanation of something that you were curious about, a term?
Not really a question, but I thought it was really interesting when you showed us, like where each city was and like how they each define resilience and where they lean more towards. I think that's something that I totally had not thought about. And yeah, I don't know. I think it shows that there's still a lot of progress to be made. And like I think even when we think about like environmental resilience, a lot of us are still in different phases of our own thinking. And it's like we don't have that much time left. These changes, so it really can be frustrating to see how far behind some of us are. So yeah, I think it was really eye-opening to see like where different cities are on the spectrum and like how slow bureaucratic change can take. um yeah, that's it. It's very eye-opening.
Yeah, no, I get your to have been able to do like a temporal, like having looked at historically a few years ago and do it again. Maybe means we need to do it again a few years. But to really see whether the change has been slow or not, it's kind of relative, because also in the last let's say 5 years that we've been doing this project, I do think the progress has been in some cities fast. It's more about a I'm not saying like, I don't want to say keeping up with the science, because that's not the way I think about it at all. It's just that there are terms that sort of travel differently, from the way they're used in academia to the way they're used in cities. And I don't think it's a bad thing that people are thinking about resilience to climate change, even if they're thinking about it in that way. But it just kind of opens our eyes as to like, oh, wait a minute, if we do want it to be this kind of resilience and really bring the principles that we know are the things that really allow change, then maybe it's on us and we need to work more with practitioners. Maybe it's on us in academia and universities to do more productive partnerships. And maybe it's on us to also explain this concept better. So I don't necessarily want to think it in a negative way of, we need to move fast, because I do, once you look at the strategies, like we saw in the plans for Puerto Rico, some of those strategies then mean changing quite a bit. If you look at the one figure I show of if I compare San Juan to other cities in terms of where they are with climate change and resilience, I say, we're very far behind. And this is before Maria, right? Like it took an event like Maria for us to really pay attention. So just the fact that those kind of strategies were there before, to me, is progress, right? But I also know that there's an urgency that you guys too feel where you're at, and so that maybe we feel it, but have become a little bit, where I have kids now, and like, so I would I guess I'm always an optimist, but it is an interesting. I'm glad you said that, because it also makes me look back at that. It would be really interesting to see other studies that maybe have looked at other cities or other plans and see what progress have been made, if any.
Yeah, I think it's a really good observation. And I think one of the things that we haven't talked about as much in class, or is just kind of, I think maybe because we're a little older, but we just kind of see how far we've come, from when we were an undergrad to now. And then you can see some of these extreme events, and it is depressing that it takes extreme events sometimes to, motivate change and rapid change. But we can see that with, hopefully with some of the social and racial justice, current events as well.
That accelerates more. Yeah. I wonder if I were to do the same survey, a few years from now, maybe it wasn't a climate event climate events themselves that we're thinking, but other types of events that shocked people into really thinking about resilience. And maybe that's what would make the equity piece more, come up more.
Yeah. Yeah, it may be different just now. I mean, we are just in such a time of rapid change, both in what we're seeing in terms of the scary stuff, but what we're also seeing in terms of the accelerated response. So I mean, I guess we have to be optimists in some ways, while acknowledging all of the, the change that needs to happen. Other questions or comments? So if nobody else has anything to think, just marinate on your thoughts for a minute, but the LA River, I just kept thinking of the LA River when you were talking about the
we've been talking about the LA
channelization.
River a lot right now.
I imagine that you have been. So we spent some time in this class talking about the LA River and, the channelization decisions of the mid 1900s and just how we're trying to walk back from that, or somehow not walk back, but move forward from that and figure out what does that look like. And then there's been this, multi-decade process of planning and more recently this updated master plan process, and that's involved. We've been dissecting a little bit the governance actors of that process, and equity is a central theme in that. So there were a lot of parallels, and I do remember you reaching out a few years back about the LA River, and now I see why.
Yeah, no, we have to touch base, Suze. I'm in deep with the Army Corps right now in that project, and right now we're actually doing a charrette with the school of the Professional School of Architecture and Landscape Planning. We're having this whole week, we've been doing a charrette for a counter proposal. I'm not supposed to say, but we've been sending letters. Like the Army Corps right now doesn't like me so much, but
yeah.
here's where I see the progress and the optimism. So, I'm talking about these high level examples and things, but then it comes down to, we've been having meetings with some of these communities because they're against the channelization, and they're talking about the trees that they planted, 40 years ago, and that they've been taking care of the river and they don't want to lose that. And now they're all pumped up and they want to take the Army Corps to courts. But I also see this is an equity thing, right? That if you have one community, one sector just pulling into what they want, right? There's communities downriver, though, that whatever gets done or not done upriver will affect them downriver. And so we've been meeting with them and kind of telling them the story of the river and the project, but also taking them more to the watershed and showing them this is not just a project about a river, but a project about the watershed and all the communities that are linked and that are affected. And just on Sunday, they had a big, huge town hall of their communities, like 220 something residents came during COVID restrictions. And I didn't go, I'm in Arizona, they're in Puerto Rico, but I saw Facebook Live and they were talking to them about watershed and about, nature-based solutions and just, I lived in one of those communities and no one ever talked like that when I was little, and listening to them talk like that and really defending their space. That's where I focus on to get my optimism and progress. Not to say that the actual system will let them, we'll see about that, but it's the seeds that are getting planted that I think, we can see the hope.
Yeah, for sure. Well, we're coming up to the end of our class and I need a minute or so to talk about our next class. But thank you so much. It's so wonderful to hear what you're working on and also just to see you.
I know, it's great to see you. We'll catch up again soon and we'll have a little river talk comparison.
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay, well,
But
well,
thank you
another
so much.
thank you
to
from
you all.
everyone. And we'll be in touch.
Bye.
All right, bye, Tisha.